I didn't cry on my wedding night. I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart the way people imagine women do when their world collapses. I froze. I remember sitting completely still, my body upright, my hands resting in my lap like they didn't belong to me, like they were props placed there by someone else. My mind kept saying, "Move," but nothing listened. Not my legs, not my arms, not my breath. I was inside myself, watching the room from a distance, watching the moment stretch longer than it should have, longer than I thought possible. People think pain always announces itself loudly. They think it cries, shakes, begs. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes pain just locks the door from the inside and leaves you alone with it. I didn't know yet that this night would split my life in two. I didn't know that every version of me before this moment was already gone. I just knew something was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. There was no celebration in my body, no warmth, no glow, just a heavy quiet pressing against my chest, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. I sat there thinking, this is strange. Not this is bad, just strange. Because I was supposed to feel something else. I knew that much. I wasn't supposed to feel like a guest in my own skin. The room was too still. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of emptiness that hums when nothing else is happening. The lights were low, but not comforting. The bed behind me looked untouched, smooth, almost formal, like it hadn't been invited into whatever reality I was now sitting in. I remember noticing how loud the silence was, how it made every small sound feel invasive, the faint buzz of electricity, the ticking of a clock somewhere I couldn't see, my own breathing, shallow and careful, like I was afraid to disturb something fragile. Time was passing, but nothing was changing. I kept waiting for the moment to shift, for the air to soften, for the tension in my shoulders to release, for the feeling in my stomach to settle into something recognizable. It didn't. Minutes stacked on top of each other, neat and cruel. I watched them accumulate without meaning, without purpose. I remember thinking, how long has it been? And then immediately deciding not to check, because checking would make it real. I told myself this was just nerves, just exhaustion, just the aftermath of a long day that had finally caught up with me. I told myself my body was confused, overwhelmed, slow to catch up with my happiness. That's what I told myself, because the alternative required listening to something deeper, something I wasn't ready to hear. The waiting stretched, not dramatic, not cinematic, just dull and endless, like sitting in a room after a conversation has already ended, pretending it hasn't. I started counting seconds in my head, not because I needed to know the time, but because counting gave me something to hold on to, a rhythm, a task, something that wasn't thinking. 1, 2, 3. I stopped when I realized I'd lost count and had no idea when. Eventually, I looked at the clock. I wish I hadn't. The numbers glowed back at me with no emotion at all, as if they were amused by my confusion, as if they had been watching me this whole time, quietly recording every second I sat there pretending this was normal. I remember thinking, that can't be right. I remember checking again, closer this time, like proximity might change the truth. It didn't. The time wasn't late enough to explain the absence, and it wasn't early enough to excuse it either. It sat right in the middle, uncomfortable and accusatory. That was when I noticed the first thing that didn't belong. A jacket, or rather the absence of one. I don't know why that's what caught my attention, not the door, not the quiet, not the way the room felt unfinished, just that small, ordinary detail, something that should have been there, folded over a chair, tossed casually somewhere without thought. I stood up slowly, like the air had weight, like movement required permission. I looked around again, more carefully this time. Shoes, phone charger, keys, missing. My heart didn't drop, not yet. It hovered, suspended, unsure which direction it was supposed to fall. I laughed softly to myself, not because anything was funny, but because laughter was easier than listening to the thought forming at the edge of my mind. He probably stepped out, I told myself. Probably needed air. Probably didn't want to wake me. I stacked the excuses neatly, one on top of the other, like building a wall against something I refused to name. I argued with myself the way only someone desperate to believe can. You're tired, you're overthinking. Don't ruin this with your imagination. I replayed the day in fragments, searching for proof that I was safe. Smiles, touches, words said publicly, confidently, convincingly. I reminded myself how convincing everything had looked. I reminded myself how convincing he had been. That should have been enough. It wasn't. There was a vibration somewhere nearby. Soft, brief, easy to miss. I felt it more than I heard it. A tremor in the quiet. My chest tightened. I didn't move right away. I waited, holding my breath, hoping nothing else would follow. Hoping it was nothing. Hoping my body was wrong. When it happened again, I knew pretending wouldn't protect me anymore. I stood up, not with urgency, not with fear, but with a strange, hollow calm, like something inside me had already stepped aside and handed control to instinct. I told myself I was just checking, just reassuring myself, just proving that I was wrong. That's the lie we tell ourselves when we're about to learn something we can't unlearn. I stepped into the hallway quietly, my feet careful against the floor, as if sound itself might expose me. The air out there felt different, cooler, sharper, less forgiving. That was when I saw it. Light, thin, narrow, unmistakable. Not from where it should have been. I stared at it longer than necessary, my mind scrambling for explanations that didn't require courage, that didn't require truth. Then I recognized the silhouette, not what was happening. Who? Recognition hit before understanding, and it hurt worse that way, because once you recognize someone, denial becomes impossible. My stomach turned cold, my mouth went dry. My body reacted before my thoughts caught up, like it already knew the outcome of a conversation my mind was still trying to avoid. I didn't hear everything. I didn't need to. The truth arrived all at once, fully formed, sharp, and efficient. Not as a gradual betrayal, but as a single devastating realization. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a moment. This was a plan. I stood there while the world tilted slightly to the left, just enough to make standing difficult, but not enough to knock me down. My hands shook. Not violently, just enough to notice. Nausea crept in slow and deliberate, like my body was trying to reject the reality it had just been handed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pressed my hand against the wall and focused on breathing through my nose, in controlled, measured pulls, the way you do when panic is knocking and you refuse to answer. I understood something in that moment with terrifying clarity. Reacting would give them power. So I didn't. I went back into the room, closed the door behind me, and made a decision so quietly it almost felt like betrayal, not of them, but of the woman I had been before. I chose control. I moved slowly, deliberately, every action intentional. I documented, I packed, I secured what was mine. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was. Anger sharpened me, pain steadied my hands. By the time the sky outside began to change, I was already gone. I didn't look back, not because it didn't hurt, but because it did, and I refused to let pain decide my direction. I didn't rush. That part still surprises people when I tell them this story. They expect chaos. They expect tears soaking fabric, hands shaking so badly nothing can be held, a woman unraveling in real time. They expect noise. What they don't expect is quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when something inside you hardens just enough to keep you standing. I moved through the room like I was following instructions only I could hear. Not frantic, not hesitant, just steady. every step deliberate, every breath measured. I picked up my phone first, not to scroll, not to call anyone, just to make sure it was charged. Battery matters when your life is about to split open. I opened my notes app and started typing facts. No emotions, no commentary, just facts, times, locations, what I saw, what was missing, what I knew. I didn't want memory to soften it later. I didn't want shock to rewrite the details into something more bearable. I wanted the truth preserved exactly as it was in that moment, ugly, sharp, undeniable. Then I checked my accounts, slowly, carefully, not because I was panicking, but because I was thinking ahead. Because the part of me that survived this night understood something very clearly. Pain makes people careless, and carelessness costs. I moved my money, not dramatically, not vindictively, just quietly, back where it belonged, somewhere it couldn't be touched by hands that had already taken too much. I packed only what was mine, clothes I bought, shoes I loved before this life, small things that carried weight, documents, jewelry, my laptop. I left everything else untouched. I didn't want a single thing that had passed through deceit to follow me into whatever came next. While I packed, my body trembled. Not violently, not enough to slow me down, just enough to remind me that I was still human underneath the calm. My stomach stayed tight. My throat burned like I'd swallowed something acidic. Every now and then, I had to stop and place my palm flat against my chest, not to soothe myself, but to anchor myself, to make sure my heart was still beating at a pace I could manage. I didn't rehearse what I would say. That mattered, because rehearsing means you're hoping for a reaction. I wasn't. I wasn't looking for explanations. I wasn't interested in apologies. I wasn't there to negotiate reality. I was there to end something. When I stepped back into the hallway, the light was still there, thinner now, muted, as if the world itself had realized what it was illuminating and had tried, too late, to pull back. I knocked once, firm, final. The door opened just enough for me to see their faces change. That was the only part of this night that gave me anything close to satisfaction. The exact second recognition replaced comfort. The instant their private world realized it had been breached. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said their names, slowly, clearly. No emotion attached. Names carry power when you strip them of warmth. I told them I knew. That was it. No accusations, no questions, no performance. Silence filled the space between us, thick and choking. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the scrambling for a narrative that would put control back in their hands. I didn't give them time. I told them I was leaving. I told them not to contact me. I told them everything from this point forward would go through people whose job it was to protect me, not lie to me. And then I turned around. I didn't wait to see if they followed. I didn't listen for footsteps. I didn't need to confirm that my absence hurt. I walked away because staying would have required me to explain myself to people who had already decided I was expendable. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. That sharp, pre-dawn cold that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. The sky was beginning to shift. Not light yet, but no longer fully dark. That in-between state where everything looks unfinished. I took a deep breath. It hurt, but it was clean. I got into my car and closed the door. The sound echoed louder than it should have, final and contained. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel for exactly 3 seconds. I counted them. Then I sat up, started the engine, and drove. I didn't cry then either, not because I wasn't broken, but because survival had taken priority. The aftermath didn't unfold dramatically. There were no public scenes, no screaming phone calls, no social media spectacle. Things ended the way they should have ended from the beginning, quietly, legally, efficiently. Papers were filed, agreements were made, names were separated, futures untangled. People found out eventually. They always do. Stories travel faster than truth, but truth has a way of catching up when it doesn't chase. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to, because the people who mattered never asked me to. Healing didn't arrive as relief. It arrived as exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones once the adrenaline wears off. Once your body realizes the threat has passed and finally allows itself to feel the weight of what it survived. Some days I was angry, furious in a way that made my hands ache, angry at the betrayal, angry at the planning, angry at how easily trust had been worn like a costume and discarded. Other days, I felt nothing at all, just a wide, blank space where certainty used to live. Both were necessary. I learned quickly that healing isn't about becoming soft again. It's about becoming honest. Honest with yourself about what you ignored. Honest about the instincts you silenced to keep the peace. Honest about how much of yourself you gave away trying to make something work that was never real to begin with. I stopped romanticizing resilience. Strength isn't staying. Strength is leaving before you disappear completely. Over time, I began to trust myself again. Not the version of me who wanted everything to work, but the version who noticed when it didn't. I learned to listen to discomfort instead of arguing with it. I learned that intuition doesn't shout, it waits. Peace came quietly, not as happiness, not as closure, but as a steady, unremarkable calm. Mornings without dread, nights without replaying conversations, decisions made without fear of disapproval. I didn't rebuild the life I lost. I built a better one that didn't require me to shrink, explain, or perform. That night didn't break me. It introduced me to myself. And if you're listening to this and something inside you feels tight, if a memory surfaced or a warning bell rang, don't ignore it. You don't need proof to protect yourself. You don't need permission to choose peace. You don't owe your silence to anyone who benefits from it. Sit with what you feel, not to react, but to understand. And when you're ready, choose yourself. Always choose yourself.